All right, we're back picking up with Foucault, and I got Mackenzie Winter on the situation here. All right, so the issue is you think you know where an author begins and ends, but can an author just add to their work at any time? Can they just publish something on Twitter and it's part of the story? Or is that something that you should ignore and not take seriously? And this is, on the one hand, it's cute that like J.K. Rowling keeps adding to the story. I guess it's sort of nice. One of the things we want from our stories is for them never to end. That's why every Marvel movie is essentially an advertisement for the next Marvel movie. And movies that come out are either sequels or prequels or remakes, because we don't ever want these stories to end. And J.K. Rowling, because she's alive, can just keep adding to it whenever she wants. And things that seem done turn out never ever to be done because we don't want these stories to end. So, like, The Shining was a real good book, but I didn't think that we were going to get a sequel to it written like 40 years later, but we did. And now it's like, is that official or is it just nonsense? Um, okay, I'm going to give my Shakespeare example, I think, now. So the issue with Shakespeare seems simple, right? Who wrote Hamlet? Shakespeare. It's easy. Where does Hamlet begin and end? Well, Hamlet begins on page 1 and it ends on, in our copy, like page 40. So easy. The problem with the Shakespeare, though, is to remember that Shakespeare, we don't really know. We don't have, like, this isn't written down in his handwriting. The earliest copies of Shakespeare we have were put together by editors, who were working from copies that really weren't meant to be published. They were like the scripts that actors use, which doesn't have like everything on it, right? For example, there are no stage directions. There's no, you know what I mean? It's just literally, we just have the dialogue people were supposed to say. But that doesn't mean we know how Shakespeare wanted it to look on stage, where he wanted people to stand, or what, or mentioned that line from Hamlet, where Polonius says, "I'm sure your son is crazy because he's in love with my daughter. If this be otherwise, take this from this." And I mentioned this earlier. But like, we don't know what he's supposed to do there. We're pretty sure he means take this from this, meaning if I'm wrong, you can take my head from my body. You can chop my head off. That's how sure I am that I'm right. If I'm wrong, you can take this from this. You can chop my head off. But we don't know. We're making that up. So the editors created a published version of Shakespeare that Shakespeare himself never, he didn't make sure it all looked right. Somebody else published it, and after his death, and he did, we I if he might have been like, oh shit, is this how I'm going to be remembered for 400 years? Let me look at this again and see if there's anything I want to change. I'm going to correct the spelling here and make sure these lines are exactly right. But we don't know. Um, then that book got edited together. But the thing is, there are several old manuscripts from that time period. In particular, Hamlet is one of the most confusing ones. There are three different versions of Hamlet. The first one's real short and real different. The other two are very similar, but one of them has speeches that aren't in the other, and the other one has speeches that aren't in the first one. When you go buy Hamlet in the store, what you're getting is something a professor put together for you. Well, how did the professor put it together? Well, the professor looks at the three old manuscripts and essentially combines them all into one book, which is how you end up with a Hamlet that's like 4 hours long. Hamlet was never supposed to be 4 hours long. It just got that size by combining the three manuscripts because people were like, well, if there's a speech over here, we're keeping it. If there's a speech over there, we're keeping it. Then that copy put together by an academic gets used by theater people, actors and directors, who then make decisions about how they're going to deliver the line, and what they're going to say and how they're going to do it. And there's a great line from Hamlet that I love. Mackenzie, did I already talk about the thank you, Rosencrantz and gentle Guildenstern. Thank you, Guildenstern and gentle Rosencrantz. Good. So, so like one of the examples I gave I mentioned this earlier in class, is that the Queen says thank you, Rosencrantz and gentle Guildenstern, and the King says thank you, Guildenstern and gentle Rosencrantz. It may be, sorry, the other way around. It may be that the Queen is correcting the King. Maybe he forgot their names, or maybe they just thanked them in the different order. We don't know why. So when you watch the movie version of Hamlet, what you are seeing is the directors and actors making decisions about how to interpret the text, which is a modernized text that has been fused together and edited together with updated spelling and things to make it clearer, by a 19th or 20th century author. That is based off of a 16th century text that may or may not be what Shakespeare intended in the first place. And then when you go to write your essay about the movie, you go, what Shakespeare said was, How is that Shakespeare? There's like 15 people involved in that, right? There's the multiple editors from the old days. There's the modern editors putting together a book for you. There's the actors and the directors and making decisions in the movie. And like, it's not, so the point is that the boundaries of the book and the boundaries of the author are not as simple as you would think. Really, when we say the author meant, that's just a nice, simple shorthand for an extremely complicated process. Similarly, when we say the book, that's just a shorthand. It's just an easy way to say something, but actually, it's much more complex than that, because the thing is put together from so many sources. And this gets extra complicated when the authors are still alive, like J.K. Rowling is, to add to stuff. Because where if she dies and someone continues the story, is that official? Is that real? Do I have to accept all of that as like what happened to the characters next? What if she gets dementia and gets on Twitter and starts saying crazy shit, right? Like, what if she gets on there and she's like, guess what, guys? After the events of the last book of Harry Potter, Hagrid joined ISIS. Maybe because she could do that. She could get drunk and get on Twitter and be like, Hagrid joined the Taliban. And like, is that it? I mean, it's the author. She said it. So now every time I read Harry Potter, I have to think about the fact that later on Hagrid will join the Taliban, and then I'm gonna be like, oh shit, look at what like. This is the boundaries are complex. Okay, and now I'm turning to Mackenzie for some additional Harry Potter-esque commentary. If you have any, I don't know. You can
Oh,
say
I have
no,
a
by
lot
the
of
way.
Harry Potter commentary
All right.
all the time. Yeah, so the thing too that's complicated about that is that even so in a similar way to Shakespeare, even if we go to the original text, the books, that has been looked at by like J.K. Rowling wrote it, right? Famously on some napkins on a train. And then that turned into she typed it up. Probably she changed some of her original wording. And then it gets edited by whoever decides to publish it. And so that already has gone through 3 or 4 people before it turns into the book by J.K. Rowling, which we start from. And like that is one thing. And then on the way other side is all of the marginalia, all of the little things that she has said outside the text, the interviews and the tweeting. But then somewhere in between, it also becomes really complicated because we have the movies, we have the play, we have the Pottermore website where she posts like little articles that describe things about the Harry Potter world. And like, are those are like somewhere in the middle in this confusing way of like, she has said that the play, which she did not write but she did endorse, is part of the canon, but she didn't write it. So at what point is where does that authorship come from? Does it come from somebody else who did write it, but it is part of canon because J.K. Rowling says it is and she's the original author? Or is it more complex than that? And like, even with the play or the movies, again, it goes through this process of then there's the directors and the actors and the set designers and all of the people involved that make choices about what that's going to look like. And in this situation, I believe J.K. Rowling had a lot of say in it and was able to point people in directions. I know that she also famously spoke with some of the actors about things that hadn't been published in the books yet so that they would have a fuller understanding of their character. But at what point is that part of the canon and what point is it not? And canon is just like the whole body of work, usually used to mean the Bible. Like that's the classic
Good.
canon, it's just the Bible.
Yeah. And with that note, and that's actually something that I is really important to talk about here, and I'm really glad you brought that up. Is the Bible? This is coming out, and Foucault mentions this. He's going to talk about this, but it very much has to do with the Bible, which I know seems crazy. But if you think about it, right, one way of thinking about the way the Bible works is depending on your religion. And actually, let's say this: like Catholics, Protestants, and Jewish people. Let's start with those groups just to get started. If you go to religious services, they're going to have a Bible there, and the Bible is going to have books. A lot of those books are going to be pretty much the same. Genesis, for example, is pretty similar. If you get a Bible in a synagogue or in a Protestant church or in a Catholic church, Genesis, God created the first, there was nothing, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light, etc., etc. But this gets tricky because a lot of the books will be quite different. I actually need to end this video, but I'll pick it up in the next one.